Heart to Heart, a Catholic media ministry, presents Good News Today, featuring an inspiring gospel teaching by Father Jim Willing.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus told his disciples this parable. A man going on a journey called in his servants and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to a third 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. Immediately the one who received 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5. Likewise, the one who received 2 made another 2. But the man who received 1 went off and dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came back and settled accounts with them. The one who received 5 talents came forward, bringing the additional 5. He said, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more." His master said to him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come, share your master's joy." Then the one who had received 2 talents also came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more." His master said to him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Since you were faithful in small matters, I will give you great responsibilities. Come, share your master's joy." Then the one who had received the 1 talent came forward and said, "Master, I knew you was a demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering where you do not scatter. So I went off and buried your talent in the ground. Here it is back." The master said in reply, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I did not plant and gather where I did not scatter. Should you not then have put my money in the bank so that I could have got it back with interest on my return? Now then, take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And throw this useless servant into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth." The Gospel of the Lord.
I was at a party and sitting next to this gentleman who had been drinking a while. And do you know how some people, after they had a few beers, they start philosophizing and theologizing and really sitting back and sharing all their wisdom, I guess. And this guy turned to me and said, "Father, life is short and we can't take anything with us." He then added, and I thought an interesting observation, "I never saw a U-Haul follow a hearse." I said, "That's true, that's true." He said, "You can't take anything with you, and so my motto is, use it or lose it." And I thought, that's good. I can go with that motto, and for some reason, that's the title I've given to this parable. Use it or lose it. As we look at this parable, it's the second of 3 consecutive parables we're looking at, again, all about Jesus' second coming. We can understand almost immediately who the master is in this story. You recognize as Christ himself. And by the suggestion, as Jesus says, the man goes off on a journey, there's a hint here about Jesus' own ascension into heaven. And he entrusts with his servants, and the servants are all of us here, with his funds, distributing each according to each man's abilities. Now, it's interesting that the master had calculated and distributed these mutual funds, if you will, according to each man's abilities. And in fact, what he gave them, we're told, was these silver pieces. Now, actually, in some of your Bibles, you would know this. The word is talents. The Jewish talent was the largest silver coin in Jesus' time. A single talent would be equivalent today to about $1,000 in our modern economy. One commentator I read suggested that would mean it would be worth the wage of a worker back then who would have worked for 15 years. In any matter, given the fact that then this man distributes each one these certain talents, did you know that's where we get the word talent today? A talent is that natural ability given to each person. In those days, it was money. In these days, it's God-given gifts. In either case, please understand this double meaning, that it provides a wonderful insight into the teaching of this parable. So given the great value of these talents or silver pieces, when the master gave to the first 5,000 silver pieces, remember one silver piece or 1 talent's worth $1,000, that means that first man would have received what would be equivalent today to $5 million. He just won the lottery. The second would have received $2 million. The third, $1 million. It's not important so much the precise amount. What is important is we see the vast and huge sum of money given to these men. That the master is overly generous. Almost, it would seem, overly confident. Amazing, the confidence he shows in these men by entrusting them with his funds. And then he went off. Again, this kind of suggests how the Lord gives us so much in terms of gifts and talents and time to be used as we would see. And notice the master doesn't hang around looking over his shoulders or their shoulders, checking in on them. Suggesting again, tremendous trust in which God has in us. Immediately, notice the word immediately. The man with the 5,000 talents went to invest it and made another 5. In the same way, the man who received it 2,000 doubled his figure. The man who received 1,000, however, went off instead and dug a hole in the ground where he buried his master's money. What I learned this week in studying this parable is that in first century Palestine, burying money was the safest way of keeping it and protecting it. It's like equivalent today to putting it in the bank. You know, it's not going to do much there, but it's safe. It's secure. Clearly, he was playing it safe, doing what he thought was in his best interest. Keep that in mind. In his best interest to do. And then, after a long absence, and what is that long absence for us? But the time between when we were born and when Christ comes again for us. The master returns and calls an accounting of his servants. And here we again, by the way, have a word master. We will hear also the word Lord, Kyrios. You remember, of course, Kyrie eleison, the Greek word for the Lord. This parable is suggesting the final judgment that we will all be called to and held accountable for. At that point, the man who had received the 5,000 came forward, bringing the additional 5. "My Lord," he said, "you let me have 5,000. See, I have made 5,000 more." His master said to him, "Well done. You are an industrious and reliable servant. Since you were dependable in a small matter, I will put you in charge of larger affairs. Come, share your master's joy." You know, it occurred to me as I read that that how does the master reward him for a job well done? He gives him another job. Does this sound familiar? You do something well, watch out. You'll be asked to do more, right? You've heard the saying, if you want to have something done, ask a busy person, because they know how to be responsible and get things done. The point here is, it is a blessing to be given these responsibilities, because they're all opportunities for what? The vesting and investing God's wealth, His goodness. Consider that as we are called to service ourselves. And what is the reward? The very work itself carries a certain reward, that we could even do God's works. Never forget the time I was just finished preaching a mission, 4 evenings in a parish. I gave my very best. I think it went well, but I was surprised that no one on the staff, no one at any time during the mission, even at the end, bothered to say thanks. I was really hurt by that. I was even a little angry at it. And I was even telling God about that. On the way back, I was driving saying, God, isn't that something? People are so ungrateful today, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, it's always dangerous when you talk to God about these things. Because in a flash of a moment, He reminded me, Jim, you have never bothered to thank me for the privilege to be able to preach the mission to my people. And I'm telling you, I almost had a wreck. Because He literally turned me all the way around and saw what a gift it is to give. What a gift it is to do His work. I lost sight of that. Ever since then, I said, please God, I pray, I would never be concerned about who thanks me except that I would thank you to be able to do your work. I'm reminded of a much greater preacher, Billy Graham, who I think has been so blessed with many talents that he has used so well for the service of the Lord. I'm sure you would agree. I saw an interview that David Frost, the British television commentator, asked Billy Graham this question. He said, Billy, after you die, what do you want people to say about you? You know what Billy Graham said? I don't care what anybody says about me after I die, except for one person, and that is the Lord. And I would want Him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Wow. This is what I thought He will truly say that to Billy Graham, don't you think? Well done. But it's interesting, because further in the interview, Billy Graham shared he feels this urgency to do more for God. Mind you, the interviewer, David Frost, said, aren't you interested in retiring? He says, you know, I've learned no one retires from doing the Lord's work. Wow. Do you hear this? Because this is what the man with 1,000 talents did. He retired his talent. Now, I want to say something to those that are retired. It's okay to retire from work as long as you understand you can never retire from God's work. And I'm not talking about what you do so much as who you are. You understand? Look at Cardinal Bernardine, who has had to retire from his administrative responsibilities and leadership of the Archdiocese of Chicago, given his terminal sickness and impending death. But in his dying, he is doing more to give witness about how to live for the Lord, how to surrender to the Lord. What a gift. What a gift. And so, what is the Lord calling us to? We continue the parable, and the man with the 2,000 talents stepped forward. Now, mind you, this guy could have done what I do sometimes, and we'd say, how come I didn't get as much? God, when you were distributing talents, how come you didn't give me more intelligence? You know, I often wonder that. The important thing is each man was given just the right amount for who he was and who she is. You know what I'm saying? God knew we could only handle so much responsibility. He knows what we need and what would be asked of us. What's asked of us is we do all that we can to use all God has given. And sometimes a little can do much more than a lot. Does that make sense? God uses little people to do powerful works, if you will, his work, his miracle. So the man with the 2,000 stepped forward, handed back double the amount of his investment. And again, the master said, well done, or cleverly done, and invites him to come share your master's joy. Of course, that image is loaded with the best vision of heaven. Come, share the richness, all the wealth of God, all the gifts of eternal life and happiness. I'm reminded too how, can you hear the master's delight in the servants who prove themselves to be industrious and enterprising, using their works and doing good works? It suggests to me how God must be so happy when we're using our time and talents to the full, when we're becoming the best of who we are. St. Athanasius said it best. I remember this quote. He said, God is glorified in his people who are fully alive. God is glorified in his people who are fully alive. Our greatest compliment to God is to appreciate what he's given us and give it back to him by sharing it and giving it to others. Finally, this third servant who received 1,000 talents stepped forward. My Lord, he said, I knew you were a hard man. You reap where you did not sow, gather where you did not scatter. So out of fear, did you hear that word? So out of fear, I went off and buried your 1,000 silver pieces in the ground. Here is your money back. Take a step back for a moment. Don't you feel a little sorry for this guy? He tried to do what he thought was best. He was afraid. But what we see here is such an important lesson. Please hear this well. I think fear is one of the worst things that paralyzes us, immobilizes us, and prohibits us from becoming and doing what God is asking and wanting for our lives. Would you agree? Fear of failure, fear of what others might say, fear of what could happen or repercussions. Fear is the strategy of Satan. Fear is the way the devil gets us not to do God's work. And I've seen it paralyze so many people. In fact, doesn't fear affect us all in some way? This servant, notice, never did anything bad. It's just that he didn't really do anything that was good. You see what I'm saying? This is very important. Because how do we bury our talents except to keep it to ourselves? I think all of us are for a little surprise at our judgment day. The Lord wants to give us a preview of this judgment, that we could see ourselves as he sees us, which is to see all the goodness in us. Now again, consider, if you're like me, and I'm not trying to present any false humility here, it's just the truth, how I feel. I never felt I was very talented until I read this great quote from Pope John the 23rd, who said, whoever has a heart of love always has something to give. Isn't that a great quote? Whoever has a heart of love always has something to give. Who of us don't have a great deal of love we could give? Consider even more. Everybody here today, has been given the greatest treasure, which is our faith, that so many people in the world really do not have. And how have we kept that faith buried inside ourselves? How have we failed to invest that and spread that and share that with others? Brothers and sisters, if we have not been so bold to talk about our love for the Lord and the good works that the Lord can do and the benefits of faith, then hear this next line, because it is addressed to all of us. His master said, "You worthless, lazy lout." Whew, those are hard words. You know what I find most interesting about this is the poor guy was trying to say, look, Master, what kept me from doing this? I was afraid of you. Well, his master has a whole different perception. He's saying, no, your good intentions are not good enough. The truth is, you were lazy. The truth is, this is not a good enough excuse. We could all give excuses. Lord, I would have done this, but. I would have done this, but. I would have done this, but. You've heard me say, you can't get to heaven on your butts. The Master says, get busy. Just do it. You know what I'm asking of you. If you know what I'm asking of you, then do what you can do. Don't be afraid of failure, for I will be with you. That's the whole point. So he goes on and says, this is surprising. He tells his other servants, take the 1,000 away from the man and give it to the man with 10,000. Isn't that a little bit ironic? Because the man was afraid of losing it to begin with, which is why he kept it to himself. And yet, eventually, ultimately, he lost it anyway. I think that's what we're afraid, what will happen. And yet, so many times, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, our own fear. We need to trust. We need to have confidence. You know what confidence means? The word confideo. They have faith with faith. And where do we put our faith? In God, even more than ourselves. And so it is the Lord who leads us to invest our time and talent. But where and how? We need to be as wise with our time and talent as we are with our money. Amen? Because certainly they are just as precious, if not more. So we need to learn this lesson. Let me end on the point of the parable that suggests throw this worthless servant into the darkness outside where he can wail and grind his teeth. It's an awful image of the final condemnation at the end of time. In contrast to the beautiful reward it's promised to those who spend themselves, invest themselves in life and in others and in love, who are told, come, share your master's joy. So to summarize, this truly is a parable of the talents. Jesus is our master. We are his servants. He puts tremendous trust in us by giving us tremendous gifts. Gifts of faith, gifts of love. Even, can you hear this? Gifts of our own suffering. That is a precious gift, not to be wasted. For even in our suffering, I go and visit these old people who are in nursing homes dying. And I found in their suffering, they're most united to Christ, and their intercession is so powerful for others. We should waste nothing, for everything is gift of God. A wise servant knows that and sees that and uses everything as an opportunity of giving back to God and to others what God gives to us. And how Jesus delights in that kind of attitude of gratitude that we would take. I'd like to ask some serious questions today, too, in fact. These questions are, what are the most important gifts, talents that you have been given? What are they? And secondly, how can you use these gifts to better serve God and serve others? I'd like to spotlight a few people who I think give great testimony, who I think are great examples, who use their time and talents. You may have read about this simple woman, Asuela McCarty. She was simply a servant, washing and ironing clothes for a wealthy family. She saved most of her money, most of her life, and set up a scholarship fund for disadvantaged children to be able to go to a university. She had very little, but what she did, one of her great treasures was the Bible that she read every day. Is it any wonder? This beautiful article about Asuela McCarty and how she gives. So inspiring. One of my favorite stories of a man who used his talents is a man who woke up one morning reading the newspaper, he was shocked to read his own obituary. Can you imagine seeing your own death notice in the paper? Here, the reporter had obviously mistaken his brother, who had just died, with himself. Once he recovered from this initial shock, he read with great deal of interest what they had to say about him, and then had an even greater shock. Because the obituary read, the title headlines was, "Dynamite King Dies." The article went on to identify him as truly he was the inventor of dynamite, and then described him as a, quote, merchant of death and destruction. The article went on to explain that he had amassed a great deal of fortune and fame for himself by manufacturing weapons of destruction. When he read that, some power came over him that was greater and more powerful than dynamite. And he believes it was the power of God's insight that showed him how he needed to change his life. And that moment he made what he believes the most important decision of his life. He redirected his energy and much of his money to establishing an award system for accomplishments that would constructively and creatively benefit humanity. Today, this man is known not as a merchant of death and destruction, but throughout the world, he is known as the founder of the annual Nobel Prize. In physics, in chemistry, in medicine, in literature, and in peace, this man I speak of is Alfred Nobel. What a great story of a man who used his talents to encourage the talents of so many others. Amen.
Heart to Heart welcomes you back next week for another inspiring edition of Good News Today. If you are interested in other books, CDs, DVDs, or digital downloads by Father Jim or Father Michael, you can call toll-free 1-877-208-4875 or visit our website, www.heartoheart.org. There, you can also sign up to receive a weekly reminder to listen to these same programs online. And please, consider a donation of any size to help support Heart to Heart's radio and internet ministry. That's www.heartoheart.org or call 1-877-208-4875. Thank you for listening, and may God bless your heart and the hearts of all of your loved ones.
Heart to heart, hand in hand, praying for grace to understand.